Hello and welcome to episode 97 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. The children are nestled all spooky in their beds, while visions of spiders dance in their heads. And we are celebrating our 8th annual holiday spooktacular. This year, we're watching The Silence of the Lambs, the major Oscar Award winner directed by Jonathan Demme, starring Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. The Silence of the Lambs has been scaring audiences for 30 years, and is one that's spooked me and Ryan from time to time. A real horror classic is just what David S. Pumpkins ordered for this year's holiday spooktacular.
The Silence of the Lambs was released in late January of 1991, usually the dumping grounds for studio movies. But it proved to be a powerhouse with real staying power come Oscar season. It is only one of 3 movies in Oscar history to win what are considered the top 5 awards: Best Screenplay, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Picture. It was made for only $19 million, and it ended up grossing over $272 million worldwide. It won Jodie Foster her second Oscar and Anthony Hopkins his first. Jodie Foster became an even more bankable star, and Anthony Hopkins became a Hollywood legend overnight for his unmatchable performance as one of Hollywood's most memorable and disturbing villains.
But do Oscars and tons of money make a movie holiday spooktacular material?
Or does this movie need to get the hose again? Keep listening.
You see a lot, Doctor? Or are you strong enough to point that high-powered perception at yourself? What about it? Why don't you look at yourself and write down what you see? Maybe you're afraid to.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. You fly back to school now, little starling. Fly, fly, fly. Fly, fly, fly.
That was maybe one of the most iconic lines.
Do we even need to say?
From cinema? Of course, Anthony Hopkins as Dr. Hannibal Lecter, Hannibal the Cannibal, in the movie we're talking about for this year's holiday spooktacular, The Silence of the Lambs.
And what a spooktacular.
What a spooktacular.
What a clip. I feel like if you were making a playlist for your spooktacular, like of clips that you would want to have, like maybe playing on the porch of your house as the kids were coming to trick or treat, you know, just a best of the best spooktacular clips.
Just scary movie lines.
Yes,
yeah.
That's in there.
That's
for
up there.
Sure.
It is.
It doesn't get cut. That's for sure.
Yeah. What's the Spotify for movie lines?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it exists.
That might be a market that is untapped, and we should branch out.
I'd be curious to know how many copyrights and patents we have had a hand in just from people listening to this podcast and the wealth of ideas. Yeah, the ideas that we just throw out there. And here's another one. There's a
free of
freebie
charge
for your listeners. Come up with that streaming service that just plays movie clips.
That would be great.
And it would not be annoying at all to anyone else around you when you were like, you got to check out this
just
playlist.
Listen to this playlist. This doesn't make any sense.
And and then of course there'd be a spooktacular playlist.
Yeah.
So
we would curate one.
For sure.
So if you make that, go ahead and hit us up. We'll do a guest playlist.
Right.
Of holiday spooktacular, of tea Thanksgivings, of Christmas
stuff,
lines.
Yeah. But we are here for the spooktacular. Tis the season. We're not just here to give out great ideas. For products and
things.
But
the reason for the
season is
scary movies,
and specifically this year, the scary movie being Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah,
so
a real all-time classic
for sure. Yeah,
at this point,
and actually, I think a rare classic, and we'll probably get into this. That's like
I can't imagine we will
a horror classic, but also like a cinematic classic, like a critical classic.
This is Silence of the Lambs is the first and only horror movie to win Best Picture, and it's one of only I believe 6 horror movies to be nominated for Best Picture.
Really? Do you have any of the other?
The Exorcist, Jaws, Sixth Sense.
Okay.
Black Swan is on this list, and I suppose you could say that.
You could say it.
Get Out.
Wow.
Is
which
the other one.
That in itself is quite a pantheon.
It is,
but still to be the only one to win of those.
Get Out did win Best Screenplay.
Yeah,
for Jordan Peele, which was great,
earned. Yeah,
but Jaws won for original score, film editing, and sound mixing.
You got to feel bad for any movie that was up against the Jaws theme for score.
Right, exactly.
Not our year, guys.
Right, it's not going to happen. Sorry. But yeah, the only one to win Best Picture, and one of 3 movies to win the Big 5.
Yeah, that's right. You said that in the intro, and that's man.
So that puts it up there with It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right. Which, if you were to ask me, like, trivia question, what Oscar movies have won kind of the Big 5? Not the ones I would have guessed.
No.
I mean, I knew that just from being like a film fan. You know, like I knew It Happened One Night for sure. Kind of forgot about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest being the other one. But Silence of the Lambs, I totally would not have guessed that. Because to me, it's already an outlier as a Best Picture winner.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot about it that's kind of unusual. Like we said in the intro, it was released in January. It's
not
first
peak
premiere,
season
right? And usually movies lose a lot of momentum being released that late or that early in the year than being a horror movie. And Anthony Hopkins was not well known at this time.
Anthony Hopkins,
right?
You know,
this is where he became
Anthony Hopkins. Yeah. Well, I was looking into this, and for the Oscars that year, it wasn't like it was one of those like, it must have just been a really slow year.
Right.
I mean, you had like other movies nominated for a lot of these categories were things like JFK and Thelma and Louise. As far as all the special effects stuff, you had T2 Judgment Day, which is like, man, of course that was going to win all that stuff.
Right.
You know? But like Fisher King was nominated for a bunch of stuff in the acting categories especially. So it wasn't like, it wasn't even like it was one of those just weird years where there wasn't a whole lot else going on. So they just gave everything to Silence of the Lambs. No, this thing like legitimately beat out a lot of other like.
Well, Anthony Hopkins beat Robert De Niro, Warren Beatty, Nick Nolte, and Robin Williams.
And you look at director, Jonathan Demme beat out.
Well, he beat John Singleton for Boys in the Hood, Ridley Scott for Thelma and Louise, Barry Levinson for Bugsy, and Oliver Stone for JFK. Yeah,
Bugsy was the other big movie of that year. That kind of had all the nominations. But yeah.
It beat Hook for everything. Hook didn't even get nominated for Best Picture. That's how strong of a year it was. They didn't have room for Hook.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't even have room to nominate Rufio for supporting actor.
Supporting actor, sure. Yeah, I mean, it would have been a stretch to say lead actor. But
yeah, I mean, I guess, that's obvious. And Robin Williams, boy, heck of a year for him because Fisher King and Hook.
And Hook, yeah. I mean, he was lucky he didn't get nominated twice and split the vote even further. Right. And also interesting, that was the year Silence of the Lambs. Its competition, one of its competition for Best Picture was Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, and it was the first time a feature animated film had even been nominated for Best Picture.
Right.
So yeah, that category was interesting that year.
Well, good for the Silence of the Lambs,
right?
For rising above.
So I guess we should talk about it a little bit. I
guess we should.
We're kind of like back to basics here for the spectacular. It's just the two of us. We don't have the guest, which hopefully our listeners won't think too much is lacking because we've definitely gotten a lot out of having those guests.
Yeah.
But for the spectacular, you have to kind of break it down to the traditions, really.
Yep.
And so it's just the two of us here. And so maybe we should just do our kind of traditional thing and maybe do like, first viewings and letterboxd ratings. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm fine with doing that.
Yeah, and because it's been a while, I'll just kind of say what that means when we say our letterbox thing. And what we mean is letterbox.com, we often go on and just kind of rate our movies on a 5-star scale. And so, we like to kind of talk about our first viewings and what our ratings in Letterboxd were before the rewatch, before we went back and watched it for this episode. And then we will give, sort of before we jump into our discussion, a baseline. This is kind of what we're feeling rating-wise now after the rewatch, but before we get into our conversation.
Right.
So, do you want to go first?
Sure, okay. I can. It was a long time before I saw this movie. I obviously did not see this when I was 6.
In 1991.
In 1991. But I do remember it from when I was 6. I remember.
Yes.
It was, everybody was talking about it.
Yes.
It was all over the place. Of course, back then we watched TV where there were commercials always. And so there were a lot of advertisements. I was thinking about that today. It's like, I'm kind of glad that my kids aren't going to grow up seeing
like these
every horror movie advertisement that came out. But like I always talk about, every holiday spooktacular, it's sort of the traditional gather around. We're going to tell the story of how I was traumatized in video stores.
Yes, the video store story. Yes, if you go back through the 8 spooktaculars, this does tend to come up quite a bit. Yeah,
but this one, I just remember the poster, the moth with the skull, and the I think it's Jodie Foster's face. It's just spooky.
That poster was just always around when you were a kid.
Right.
Especially in that aisle.
Yeah. And I remember distinctly that my grandparents saw the movie, and I remember them telling my parents about the movie at a dinner, and how they loved it.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yeah. And they just thought it was great, and they were kind of like telling about the movie. And I think my parents were sort of like, I don't think you should say this in front of the kids.
Which it's kind of funny for me to imagine someone saying like, this is such a great movie, and then trying to explain it. Like, what's so great about
this? To my
this?
extremely conservative parents. Who, my other early memory is I went to summer camp when I was 8, and it was the worst experience of my life. I was not cut out for summer camp. I was a super homesick kid. I hated it. Compounded by my counselor, who thought a great idea would be to tell us the story of the movie as
It's not really a ghost story you tell around the campfire.
It's just a disturbing, horrible story. And so we're all laying in our bunks. I'm trying to not cry because I miss my parents.
And you're 8.
And fall asleep. And I'm 8. And he tells us...
Did you have to explain like what cannibalism even was? I don't know. At 8 years old, I don't know if I
think it's not a big explanation to say... He ate people. Right. But I don't remember everything he said, but I do remember he told like the detail of the story of Hannibal Lecter's escape.
Oh man, so you're at a summer camp thinking about a
guy cutting off someone's face,
escaped.
Right. And then I didn't watch the movie then either when I was 8. I didn't go home and say, I've heard about a great movie that I think we would all really like. And it wasn't until I was an adult. I don't even know. It was just, I haven't seen this. It's a big, important movie. And I watched it and I was genuinely scared. Like, I was like, I watched it sort of being like, okay, I'm not 8 anymore. This isn't gonna. And then I was like, because it's interesting. People seem to leave out the Buffalo Bill storyline.
Yes,
when they talk about this movie, when they remember the movie, which is
actually
we'll talk about this.
It's the real story.
It's the crime. Yeah, it's the crime they're investigating. So it was especially the Buffalo Bill stuff because I knew about the escape. I had not forgotten that. But one of the more scary viewing experiences is when he turns off the lights and turns on the night vision goggles, and so. It was a movie one of the few movies that as an adult, I was like, this scared me. But yeah, so it was just one that I was kind of making up for lost time. And it was like, oh, this is as good as people said.
Yeah.
And so my Letterboxd rating is, I guess it's higher than I thought it was because I wouldn't have thought this, if you just had asked me cold. But I rated it 4.5. So what about you?
Interesting. Yeah, so I didn't watch it when it came out, obviously. I don't even know if my parents watched it, but it was just kind of all over the place. Mm-hmm. 2 things I remember about this movie before even seeing it is, one, the short-lived but show that I still champion, The Critic, the animated show with Jay Sherman, voiced by John Lovitz. they would just do little movie parodies, and that might have been kind of my first exposure to Hannibal Lecter. It was just a really kind of throwaway cartoon Hannibal Lecter scene, and I do not remember even what the context was. Mm-hmm. And my other exposure to the movie and Hannibal Lecter was we had the CD-ROM on our Gateway 2000 computer. This would have been like 95. Actually, we had Cinemania. I don't know if you remember this. It was a CD-ROM. They used to have like encyclopedias,
right.
and Encarta was the big one.
Encarta, yeah.
And the same, I can't remember the name of the company. They made a movie one, and it was called Cinemania. And it came out every year, and it was like a movie encyclopedia. And it's actually where I read a lot of my first Ebert reviews.
Oh, okay.
It's also because you could pull up any movie on the CD-ROM, of course. You couldn't go beyond that. But any movie that was on there, you could read the reviews and learn basically like IMDb before there was IMDb.
Right.
And they had, because it's CD-ROM and it's old computers, they had just a very, very, I mean, we're talking like maybe 10 movies that they would actually show clips of. And they were like 15, 20-second clips.
Right.
And when you were like a kid on a like computer, this is pre-internet, those videos were cool because they weren't on your TV. They were on the computer. Yeah. And so I would watch those clips.
And it starts when I click it.
Yes, and it starts with like, and it was really pixelated and everything, but you thought it looked great,
Like a low-res GIF.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there weren't that many, but one of them on there was the scene we played at the beginning of this episode of Silence of the Lambs. And even that, I didn't know much about that movie at all. I knew it won Best Picture because that was the trivia sort of in the CD-ROM, but that just creeped me out.
Well, Anthony Hopkins is creepy doing nothing in this movie.
But then, like you, I didn't watch it for the longest time. And I finally, this was like post-college. It was one of my catch-up movies. I'm in my 20s, just like, I need to see this movie. And the first time I watched it, I was thrown that it really wasn't about Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
And it threw me to the point where I don't feel like I was really able to take in what the story was actually about. I kept waiting for like Hannibal Lecter to be sort of like a bigger part of this story.
Right.
Watching, I kind of felt like Buffalo Bill was the distraction. And so for that reason alone, I feel like I was still spooked by it, but I was a little underwhelmed. And I think I gave it, my first rating, I think was like a 3.5 or something like that. But then it was probably just about 4 or 5 years ago, I was like, I need to just rewatch that, knowing now that it's this is the context of Hannibal Lecter in the movie. I need to watch it for what it is, because it still did win Best Picture. People still did talk about it as a great movie.
Yeah.
So I rewatched it, and then I got it.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm seeing the themes it actually is concerned about. And I'm like, this is a great movie. And I gave it what you gave it, 4.5 stars.
Yeah.
And that's what my Letterboxd rating is. If you were to look at it now, before the rewatch, it was at 4.5 stars.
All right. Well, let's then talk about the rewatch. Do things change for you? Did you notice different things this time?
It hadn't been that long since I had rewatched it. Some things changed a little bit. Some things that maybe I would see as problematic, but not in a way that changed my view of the movie, I guess. So my rating stands at 4.5 because I still, I'll tell you, the part that genuinely kind of scares me every time is the part you talked about with the night vision goggles and just the performance of, you almost feel like Clarice as a character and Jodie Foster's performance, you are watching someone be traumatized.
Right.
You are watching someone like about to just almost die from just a fast racing heart and like fear, you know.
If there are any questions about Jodie Foster's performance in this movie, that scene is like enough.
And that is, this is if you want to kind of compare it to like other thrillers or slasher flicks, of course you have women who are scared and are being, people are attempting to murder them. So that's not a new thing.
Right.
But I don't know what it is. There's something about that performance and the way that like the hand is just so close to her face and she has no clue. It is just so affecting still. Still. And I knew it was coming.
I know.
And I know how it ends. Like, I know everything about where this goes, and it still is just so effective. And Hannibal Lecter still is just a fascinating character, and the psychological play going on there is still really engrossing, really interesting. Jonathan Demme just directs the hell out of this thing. Like it is such a tight wound psychological thriller horror movie. I don't know what else to do but give it the rating I give it, as far as like, especially for a spooktacular.
Oh yeah.
An effective horror movie.
I mean, with the holiday cheer flowing.
the good tidings.
Oktoberfest,
That's where I'm at. But how about you? How was the rewatch for you?
Yeah, it was the same thing. That scene absolutely worked for me. And we were
talking about the night vision,
the
last scene in the.
I was going to say that was the only thing that was kind of creepy and scary to me, but that's not true. And like you, the kind of shorthand of, well, maybe you didn't say this, but you said you saw problematic things, and I think
we're probably going in the same
shorthand
direction.
of Buffalo Bill's genderqueer identity being, and of course he's a serial killer, is absolutely pretty bad.
Yeah, I think we could get deeper on that. I fully see the problems with that.
Yeah.
I also don't know that direct correlation. I think it's an easy one to make. I don't know if it has to be made.
We can talk more.
We'll talk more about that in a bit. But, that's probably a whole other discussion.
So that, and we do need to talk more about it because for me to say like it's problematic, but in any case, I still love it. You know,
movie,
like I do think that like there are also other things as far as the female characters in the movie that it is doing really well. That I hadn't noticed before. And like you, Jonathan Demme's direction and Tak Fujimoto's cinematography, I was just like, oh yeah, this isn't just great acting and a crazy WTF story. Like this is a really well crafted movie.
Yes.
And really beautiful when it needs to be, and really stark when it needs to be. It is an all around great movie, not just like a kind of like a dare you to sit through this sort of like Fear Factor kind of movie. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, like, you know, we kind of selected this movie because it was having a 30-year anniversary. But to me, another tie to this year in 2021 is how much is something like Mayor of Easttown indebted to Silence of the
That's
Lambs?
exactly what I was thinking about.
To the point where, like, that's Philly. This was mostly filmed in Pittsburgh.
Right.
And it just had, like, everything about it. It just
working class
that
town
vibe. The whole vibe of this thing.
Even
is, you know,
there's a scene in Mayor of Easttown that is so closely related to the scene we're talking about. I mean, it's not a night vision in the dark, but it is absolutely our protagonist who walked in with the upper hand is put on the back foot and is being stalked.
There's even a scene. And it's not that particularly scene, but the house is very much the same. And there's a scene, and I hope we don't spoil much of Mayor of Easttown, but there's essentially a mirrored scene of when they kind of both realize who they are.
Capture, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like in like a kitchen
captive women in the basement.
Yes,
exactly. Yeah, if that wasn't an homage, then it's plagiarism.
Right.
But still very well executed in Mayor of Easttown. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay. I mean, Mayor of Easttown, I enjoyed that show. It was a good show. Kate Winslet did a great job as well.
Yeah.
But I was just like struck by that. I hadn't, because the weird thing to me is I watched all of Mayor of Easttown and never made that connection.
Right.
Until I watched Silence of the Lambs, and I was like, how could I not have made that connection?
Same thing for me too. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's in just in the craft of it, it's a movie that stays fresh, and then also in the way that its influences are still seen as sort of groundbreaking. Like Mayor of Easttown is sort of a groundbreaking sort of show. Like there were things about it that people saw as fresh.
Well, I think, and this is maybe sad, is that it's still groundbreaking to have a female protagonist in a sort of psychological thriller horror movie
who's actually strong and competent and
knows
complex.
What they're doing. Yes, knows what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into some of those more specific things then, now that we both wouldn't reduce our rating necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't say that outright, and I didn't say it outright, but I'm saying it now.
That you would not reduce
necessarily, like on the rewatch, I'm still probably at a 4.5.
Yeah, I think so too.
In probably different ways than it was before. Like, I think in some ways it maybe dropped a little bit, but then in other ways it rose.
Yeah, because I think there was a part of me that understood having a woman in that position in a movie like this was sort of a innovative thing for the genre, even in its time. But it's not just let's put a woman in this role, but do the exact same thing.
Right.
The way that Demme really seems to have a grasp of what it's like to be a woman in a male-centric world and environment.
Right.
And it's not just in the obvious stuff of like the way the insane people.
Right. It's not just the way the criminals treat her.
It's the way the entire and so there is this like baked in sense of dread.
Yeah.
Even when there's nothing really going on.
From the beginning, feel a sense of danger for Starling.
And loneliness and isolation. You know, and there's a reason she's like running alone. That's how the movie opens. All these other men
are training together.
Right. And of course, there's other scenes where she is with those men and she's holding her own, but, you know, there's definitely a tension there.
Yeah.
And it's not just something she's imagining.
No.
You are seeing the way they look at her. The way that, and it's not just a gaze of like a sexual thing. It's also a look of like, what are you doing here?
Exactly.
You know,
it was, that's one thing that I noticed this time. The various ways that a woman is put in danger, even by the men who see her talent and see her potential and see her ability, they all look at her more or less the same way. And I again, like you, I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but when the camera is shooting from her point of view, which it does a lot.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
The men look directly into the camera or anybody, because I think her friend, whose name I don't remember, but she's played by Cassie Lemons.
Yeah.
Who ended up directing a couple other movies. Like she directed Eve's Bayou and Harriet.
Yeah, has quite a career in her own right. Yeah, even though she has a few lines here and there.
She's got a pretty small role, but important role.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I want to talk about in a little bit too. That even before she encounters any quote unquote psychopaths, she is looked at and scrutinized and leered at and
condescended to.
Right. It's really interesting that when she is waiting to be let into the row of cells, the camera pans across the room of men who are there to quote unquote protect her and let her in. And at least two of the three men kind of leer at her.
Well, this is after she's already actually been kind of harassed by the guy who's the director of this asylum.
Dr. Chilton.
Yeah, I mean, he's straight up kind of sexually harassed her verbally, saying, we don't usually see them, they don't usually look as good as you or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact line. That's already happened.
Right. But you've got Barney, played by the great Frankie Faison, who is there looking out for her, and and it's you've got that difference to know that there is a man who is there and sees the danger she's in.
And Hannibal Lecter, actually, he sees her, and whether it's a matter of he's playing a mind game where he knows that she feels threatened in her world outside of him, that he can play on that and sort of gain a sympathy with her, or if he genuinely does just see that and kind of finds this human connection with her on that level,
which might be both.
Probably is,
Yeah, so that just continues throughout the whole movie and culminates in the night vision scene, where that's really the only other time we get a POV. Because another thing I noticed was when Lecter's talking to Clarice, he's looking directly into the camera. And when Clarice is talking to Lecter, she's looking slightly left of camera. We're not getting anybody's point of view other than Clarice's until we are stalking her.
Wow. Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. But it also is not often that we as men get to experience that in the movies,
right.
Get to kind of experience it on that level in a way in which, and this is something I really want to talk about, is of course, we as men have plenty of experience watching, especially if you watch horror movies, we have experience watching the fear of a woman being assaulted or a woman being chased. I mean, you look at even just like the Drew Barrymore opening scene in Scream or something like that.
Right.
We that's not what I'm saying we don't have experience with.
Right.
But to basically have that in the movie as sort of like, this is the genre. The genre is a man will stalk and kill these women.
Right.
But then to add on to that this is not
the
going to be
horror.
Yes, yeah, the daily horror. And then to add on to that, though, in a sort of optimistic way, as far as what the movie is doing, is the way out of this is not going to be a Prince Charming saving a damsel in distress.
Exactly.
The way out of this is she is going to have to do this on her own.
She's got the guts to. She's got the fortitude to handle it. in her absolute terror, she's still able to handle it. And then I also think, and this is where I want to talk about Cassie Lemons again, she doesn't have a large role, but she plays a major role in that she is the only other person working through with Clarice the evidence they have.
Other than Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
But yeah.
But she is the only other person who's there piecing it together with her.
Yeah.
Clarice, doesn't this random scattering of sight seem desperately random? Like the elaboration of a bad liar. Tie Hannibal Lecter.
Desperately random. What does he mean?
Not random at all, maybe. Like there's some pattern here.
Yeah, but there is no pattern or the computers would have nailed it. Or even found in random order.
Random because of the one girl. The one he weighted down.
Frederica Bimmel.
Right.
From Belvedere, Ohio. First girl taken, third body found. Why?
Well, she didn't drift. He weighted her down.
What did Lecter say about the first principles?
Simplicity.
What does this guy do? He covets. How do we first start to covet?
We covet what we see.
Every day.
Hot damn, Clarice.
You knew her.
So it's two women and one black woman on top of it doing what the rest of the men in the agency couldn't be doing.
Yeah.
Like couldn't figure out.
Yeah, and this is something that I don't want to take credit for saying this because it wasn't something that I thought of, but I was watching a special feature on the Criterion, and I apologize because I can't remember the critic's name who was saying this.
Maitland McDonough?
Is she on the Criterion? Is that... Okay, yeah. Thanks for looking that up there. She really does a good job of explaining what's kind of special about Silence of the Lambs. And that's one of the things she mentioned is that it's really just that one of the reasons she's able to do such a good job is because she's a woman and because she can get into the minds of these victims. And she thinks more about the victims themselves on a level different than how the agents feel about them, which I think is actually shown really well in the autopsy scene.
Yeah.
Where it is, especially on the men's part, so clinical.
Right.
And it could be just that she's new to it. You know, she's a cadet still. But it's also just that you can tell she's being impacted in a way that they are not looking at this body.
And she's the one who notices the cocoon and sees things that the men don't.
That was another theme I noticed, you know, thinking of that autopsy scene where I feel like Demme is kind of playing with the audience in a way that's saying, we look at these serial killers and think, how messed up are these people?
Right.
And how grotesque. You know, this person eats bodies.
Yeah.
And this person is making a skin suit. Right. And it's grotesquerie of the body. And I think he's kind of asking, but isn't it also just a little perverse how numb these agents are to the exact same type of brutality? That there's a sort of desensitization these serial killers have to the human body. But these agents who we see as the good guys and who we in real life see as the ones who are going to take care of these problems for us also have to develop a level of desensitization that almost is on par of getting in the mind of a serial killer.
Right.
That they have to do just to do their job. But look at like how just cold and clinical and desensitized they are to this type of suffering at this point.
What else do you see, Sterling?
Well, he's not local. Her ears are pierced 3 times, and there's a glitter nail polish. It looks like town to me. Two of her fingernails are broken off, and there's dirt or grit under them. It looks like she's tried to claw her way through something.
Ray, get pictures of her teeth. We'll fax them for missing persons.
Right.
And look at how bad it makes them at their job because they're focused on getting in the mind of the killer and Clarice focuses on getting in the mind of the victim.
True. Very true.
And she seeks to understand the victim as a way to understand the pattern. And that's where she finds, that's where she's able to crack it. And
which is really interesting because I don't know how much you know about sort of the history of Hannibal Lecter in the movies. But like Michael Mann made Manhunter. And I don't know if you've seen I watched it for this episode because I wanted to know like this was I kind of wanted to know sort of the evolution of Hannibal Lecter. he's in that movie, obviously, and Brian Cox does a pretty good job as Hannibal Lecter. He's great.
I thought Manhunter was good.
I did too. I really like that movie. And it's also very similar to Silence of the Lambs, where not about Hannibal Lecter.
Right.
It's about the Tooth Fairy, a different murderer. But that movie, and in that one, it's a male protagonist. It's not Clarice. The agent's name is Will Graham, played by William Peterson. And even though the story is actually really close, but the theme of that one is, how much does an agent have to get into the mind of a serial killer to find a serial killer, and what that does to an agent? William Peterson as Will Graham, I mean, that whole movie is about sort of his destruction of character the closer and closer he gets into the mind of a serial killer.
Right.
And Hannibal Lecter sort of serves as the proxy into that.
Right.
Which is what he's kind of doing here. It just doesn't really work on Clarice, in the same way. It's exactly what you're saying, where her mind is still on the victim.
Well, as a kind of perpetual victim, for lack of, giving her agency, she is not enticed by entering the mind of a serial killer.
That's what it is.
Whereas the male characters are kind of thrilled by the idea of entering the mind of a serial killer. And that might be why Hannibal Lecter joins Clarice. He's like, oh, you don't want to be like me.
Yeah. You don't find anything exciting or interesting about me.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're also not scared of me. You're not as intimidated by me. You're not intimidated by me in the way that the men are. And you could go even deeper with it. Like he respects the fact that she is scared of him as a potential victim, whereas the men are scared of him as a potential mirror.
Well, what's interesting is she's not really scared of him as a victim. Once he's escaped, she's even just like,
she knows he's not going to. Yeah.
And she says it would be rude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually think that for anyone who hasn't done it, it's a really interesting exercise to watch Manhunter and then watch Silence of the Lambs and see the difference between Will Graham and Clarice, even how they deal with Hannibal Lecter. From what I understand, Thomas Harris wrote Silence of the Lambs, and the whole female protagonist angle was what he found interesting. Like, that's what he wanted to dive into even in the book. So the themes that we're talking about that Jonathan Demme is really pulling out in the movie, I believe they're really in the book as well.
Okay.
And that actually, the screenplay wasn't even finished by the time Jonathan Demme signed on. He signed on because he read the book. In fact, the book was a bit of a sensation. Like, a lot of people did read the book, and Orion, the studio that eventually made Silence of the Lambs, bought the rights to it, and they bought it with the intention of Gene Hackman directing it.
Yeah, well, Gene Hackman bought the rights.
Yeah, with them.
Yeah.
They went in at halfsies, basically, and they had Gene Hackman to direct. But Gene Hackman, once the script was finished by Ted Talley, Gene Hackman basically said, "This is too bloody. I want out. I don't want to do this." So Orion, the producer basically said to Ted Talley, "Finish the script, we'll find a director." And they went to Jonathan Demme, and Jonathan Demme didn't seem interested at all. I mean, if you look at the movies he did right before this, it was like Married to the Mob was what he did.
Right.
The script wasn't even finished quite yet, but Jonathan Demme read the book, and everything that he brought to that movie was in the book, and that's what he really grasped onto and latched onto. Giving attention to the female perspective, the female point of view, was actually what Jonathan Demme was most interested in.
Okay.
Well,
it shows.
And it comes through.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is really effective as far as building tension, and I think we kind of talked about it with our Texas Chainsaw Massacre episode, where usually the more you're in the dark, the scarier something is. But we see Buffalo Bill's process, and that's super scary. We see a whole lot of it, and that just makes it so much worse.
And so this might be where we should get into Buffalo Bill. If we're both talking about what we might find problematic about this movie, it centers around Buffalo Bill as a character, and specifically the queerness and in the,
because it's kind of a nebulous, just deviant, like deviance.
Right.
It's a gender identity. It's not certain whether it's a sexual identity.
They do say in the movie that he thinks he's a transsexual, but he's not, or something to that effect.
Right.
So the movie does make a point of saying he's not trans.
Right.
But yeah, there's definitely some gender themes being played with there.
Yeah.
So, and of course, he's the serial killer. in the movie. So that can be problematic. Anytime you have a serial killer, as an audience, you're going to profile that serial killer, and you're going to sort of look at sort of what is it that makes this person do what they do.
Right.
And the movie, what I think is problematic is that it doesn't really clearly spell out that part of what he's doing isn't directly connected to the killing that he's doing, even though it does in a way actually spell that out in a conversation between Hannibal Lecter and Clarice. That
it's not connected?
Well, he says something about being transsexual, and she says there is no there's no clear line between being transsexual and acting out in violence.
Right.
I might not have the wording correct. In fact, we'll probably just play the clip.
Why does he place them there, Doctor?
The significance of the moth is change. Caterpillar into chrysalis or pupa, and from thence into beauty. Our belly wants to change too.
There's no correlation in the literature between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are very passive.
Clever girl. You're so close to the way you're going to catch him. Do you realize that?
But here's the thing. So that you have that little sort of conversation between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter that could serve as sort of like a padding if you're an audience member of like, I don't need to make that connection necessarily. But come on, we all know that like the effect that has of like seeing him kind of, dancing around, tucking in women's clothing with the music he's playing and the makeup and everything. I mean,
it's supposed to be creepy.
That is supposed to have a psychological effect on you.
Right.
It's supposed to.
It's supposed to gross you out and be creepy. Another aspect of him. It's definitely all tied up into the whole thing.
Right. Well, it is also tied up because he wants to make a suit to be a woman.
Right.
So it is kind of tied up. Like it's almost like it. Here's the thing: is it kind of does need to be there, like because that is the reason he's doing it. He wants to be a woman or feels like he should be a woman, and this is his sort of perverse way of getting to there is to skin women and make a skin suit.
Right.
So that is part of the killing aspect of the perversion there. You know what I mean? Like, but then that's kind of saying that is a perversion to feel that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they don't have to connect the dots. Whatever distinction they're trying to make by saying, but he's not actually transgender, so that's not really what it is. It's like, well, then stop showing this stuff. Like, stop doing what you're doing. Like, it's like he is killing women to make a suit that looks like a woman's body so that he can be a woman. There's just one line that says like, well, there's no connection between that identity and violence. But then there is a very strong connection between that identity and the length they'll go to to do this, and isn't it creepy?
Yeah.
And like, of course it is creepy to steal skin and make a body out of it, but like, or make a suit that you could wear out of it and watching him wear part of it. But then.
So let me ask you this though. Do you not have that feeling watching Psycho? These are both, these are both ostensibly based on Ed Gein.
Right. And certainly there is damage done by saying this man dresses as women and he kills people.
Yeah.
But I think Psycho is much more about the connection to his mother and like the abuse of his mother making him hold on to her rather than this guy wants to be a woman.
Yes. Yeah.
Like this is a transgender person, and if you're perverted enough to be transgender, you're perverted enough to be a serial killer.
Right. In Psycho, it's more of a sort of Freudian kind of like a mother connection.
Now, could it possibly have a similar effect that somebody who already has bias against transgender people is going to like file that away?
Sure. Yeah,
absolutely possible.
Yeah,
but I think that the Freudian aspect of it is the point of it in that movie. But I also wouldn't tell a person who is transgender who watches Psycho and says like, "Oh gosh, look at how they're vilifying people who are like me," and tell you like, "Well, no, actually, it's a lot more about that." Like, well, and it's like, well, yeah, of course, I can see that. Whereas I feel like Silence of the Lambs is much more clearly drawing that connection because there doesn't seem to be anything other than he wants to be a woman and saying, oh no, he doesn't feel like he's a woman like a transgender person. He just wants to be a woman like a psycho. Like, is just sort of like a really strange distinction to make.
It's a hard thing, and this is because the thing is he is psychotic. I mean, you don't make a skin suit without being psychotic,
right?
And, the movie is telling you this is why he wants to make it, because he wants to be a woman. And his psychotic mind is telling him, this is how you do it.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess I don't know how you tell that story. Like, you kind of do have to show this person wants to be a woman.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you have to be predicated on the idea that he needed to make a suit out of women's skin. It's just like a creepy thing. Like, and I get that, and it's an effectively creepy idea and everything. Yeah. And like, why would he be making a suit out of women's skin other than to wear it? And why would he wear it if he didn't want to become a woman? Like, if there was some like twisted idea that he had about that, it's hard to say like, well, they shouldn't have done it this way, but they still, yeah, absolutely keep the idea of making a suit out of women's skin.
Well, because you had to have women victims, and you had to have women victims that don't get killed right away. You know what I mean? Like, you had to have all these things to kind of play with the larger themes that we've been talking about that we really like about the movie.
Right.
It might have been just a puzzle that's really hard to crack, as far as how to do that right. And that is not me excusing it, especially if there's someone who's transgendered listening and they feel that that's what's happening. Because I do think that the movie is also playing into a lot of what you saw in that early 90s time.
Yeah,
where,
for sure.
Where it was just shocking to show that. Yeah. Like Crying Game, for instance.
Exactly.
Like, that was the shock. The shock was that this person was transgendered.
Right.
And there wasn't really much more to it other than that.
Right. And can you imagine being a guy and being tricked by a dude?
And that exact trick isn't what's happening here, but it's all part of this. It's all part of this pop culture moment where that's about as deep as the trans life was shown. And so I very much understand how that is problematic, and it is problematic. I think that in Demme's mind, he thought he was kind of covering his bases with that sort of clinical line, to kind of say that that's not how Clarice sees it, at least. Like, Clarice,
that's not how it is.
Like, that's not how it is. And I do think that is. I don't think he did a good enough job of emphasizing that enough. But I think that is true. That this isn't what creeps Clarice out.
No.
His cross-dressing, or whatever you want to call it, his queerness, that is not at all what creeps Clarice out.
No. It's his methodicalness, it's his stalking of women, it's his targeting, it's his it's about what he does. And obviously, like, they're doing some things to show that is not the only thing about him, that is not his defining characteristic. Like we've said, he's insane. He is maybe a Nazi, like a white
there's
supremacist.
A swastika in there.
There's like that. There are, and so here's where it's hard. Like, okay, is the movie saying, no, he's not transgender, he is insane, and he's a Nazi, and he's like all these, like, he's got these other things,
obsessions, basically. Like, he's obsessive about whatever he's into,
and saying being transgender is apart from that. Or is it inviting being transgender is as messed up in the head as being a Nazi and as being a serial killer, and like blah, blah, blah. And I think, given the history of movies, given the time that this was made, that was sort of part of it. And in hindsight, and seeing what Demme was doing and the way that this movie sees women, you could say, like, there is some understanding that would invite this sort of dissecting and parsing of the sorts of ideas. But we've also seen historically, and very much in contemporary movements, that feminism does not necessarily understand the needs or rights of trans women.
Right.
And so, like, to say that a movie sees women does not equate their ability to see transgender
totally
women.
And I agree with that entirely.
And part of it might be that I'm trying, and I'm not going to speak for what you're trying to do, but what I would, my inclination to do the separating that we're like kind of doing is to say, but I still really like this movie, and it feels like, as a straight man, I'm able to watch this movie and enjoy it and say, oh, I don't like that, but I'm still going to really love this movie. Whereas other people, and especially transgender people, would watch this movie and be like, there's no way I can like this movie because of this aspect of it.
Well, and here's the thing is, and this is where I'm just going to have to plead ignorance on this and say, if there are listeners out here who can speak to this experience, I would genuinely want to know. Because I find what often happens when I'm a white guy watching these things, I watch it and say, boy, if I was that identity, I'd be offended right now. But then a lot of people who identify as that are not offended.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Because you cannot generalize.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I actually don't know if this is an actual controversy or if it's something that like a lot of people like me watched and said, boy, this sure does seem like it should be a controversy.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and we've pointed out ways in which I do think that there's these problematic aspects to it. Is it something that's mean-spirited, or is it something that was just handled clumsily?
Right. I think the distinction that you're making between like mean-spirited and maybe clumsy and certainly aged is probably an important one. One thing that you could watch is there's a documentary on Netflix called Disclosure about kind of the history of trans portrayal in Hollywood and the experiences of trans actors. And in the pantheon of movies that link trans identities with violence, there's a way that Silence of the Lambs fits right in.
Yeah.
But there's also ways that this movie is dealing with issues outside of that frame it a little bit differently than maybe one of like, Brian De Palma's movies where, Michael Caine just dresses a woman and kills people.
Yeah.
So to me, that's why I can watch that scene and be deeply uncomfortable with it as a portrayal of a ostensibly trans person and the easy link to violence that people could make and the easy connection for a trans person to just be like, well, there's another example of why people don't see me as a whole person.
Right.
And then the privilege I have as a cisgender person to say it doesn't bother me deeply, like on a personal level. And I guess there's some struggle to be had with that. And I think we're going to have to leave it at that. I'm struggling with it, and maybe you are too.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to have to leave it there. Yeah.
And then talk about the rest of the movie, and anything we say in praise is also weighted with that struggle. But we can't really talk about what's good about this movie or what we like about this movie and continue to like bring that into the wrestling of it. And I if that is dissatisfying to people, and I genuinely am sorry for that. And like you said, I would like to hear people's thoughts on that. But for me, it's a thing I'm still learning to understand. And it's something that maybe years down the line, I learn more. And I think, oh, yeah, I mean, like, I see why it was okay for me to like that movie. Or I could be like, yeah, actually, Silence of the Lambs isn't a movie I'm ever going to watch again.
Yeah, I don't know where and the thing is, while that is a very important aspect of this movie, it's one aspect of the movie, and there's so many, and this is true of any movie, not just Silence of the Lambs. I'm not trying to excuse Silence of the Lambs, but I am saying that like movies in general as an art form take on a lot more than sometimes what we dwindle them down to. Right,
especially over time.
Yeah, but I will say, as someone who grew up definitely not really knowing anyone trans or really even queer around me in real life growing up.
Right.
I have to be real about the fact that for most of my life, my only exposure to this stuff was The Crying Game and was Silence of the Lambs and was a lot of the stuff you're talking about from that documentary, Disclosure. Like there is a truth to that where maybe that isn't what Jonathan Demme meant. He wasn't being mean-spirited. He wasn't being clumsy, but this ended up winning Best Picture. It became part of the sort of like, lexicon of American pop culture. And so it does take on a new responsibility at that point.
Right.
And that's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's just that's the character it takes on. And that's true of a lot of movies that end up, becoming really popular that maybe are insensitive to whatever identity, There has to be a reckoning with the fact that for better or worse, whatever the movie's intent was, that ends up being what shapes a lot of people's minds about that identity.
Yes.
And, there has to be something kind of done about that.
Right.
So maybe from now on, Silence of the Lambs always does have to have an asterisk next to it.
Right.
And that's just the way it has to be. And you can even like the movie and you can like it for all these other reasons, but you can't leave that asterisk out.
Right.
Because that's part of the reckoning. That's part of the process.
Right.
And you're not doing anybody a service by ignoring it or trying to explain it away. And you can still, I think, like that movie. But I feel like you have a lot more credibility in liking it when you've gone through the arduous process of actually thinking about it in that term, in that way.
Right. Well, yeah, I guess we need to be okay with some non-closure here. on this topic. I think there are still things to talk about with
Sure.
the movie, including much like our experience with the movie being not so much about Hannibal Lecter. This episode has not been about Hannibal Lecter very
That's
much.
true. So it's actually very much in line with Silence of the Lambs in that way. Okay, here's my thing with that performance.
Okay.
It's the eyes.
Oh, yeah.
It is the eyes in that performance. I mean, they look dead.
Yep. It's crazy.
Piercing and dead at the same time.
And unblinking. The thing that's amazing about it, and it's absolutely the eyes, but the way he is able to be as commanding as he is through stillness and quiet. Just how the more menacing he is, the quieter he gets. Even that first shot of him where he sees the camera coming. You know, like when we first see him, the camera's panning across the other cells.
Standing.
And he's just standing there and he's looking right at it.
I do want to give a shout out to Colleen Atwood, who's the costume designer here, because it's a prison suit. There's not much you can really do with it.
Right.
But they made a choice in there that they were going to make that prison suit look like it was custom tailored for him. Like it fits, and the t-shirts on him fit really well.
Yeah.
And she said that was just a psychological thing we wanted to play on the audience, that this was a person that even in prison would find a way to make sure he looked good in a prison suit. And I just and that they tried they tried all sorts of different suits in orange, and then they figured out orange wasn't going to look quite right on Hannibal Lecter, so they went with the blue and then the white t-shirt.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a full package, I feel like, with Hannibal Lecter. And every scene he's in, you could break down what is he doing as an actor here. You know? And one of the ones that just really blows me away, and it's one of the more gruesome scenes, is when he's just beating Jack Napier. Is that the actor's name?
Yeah.
Who plays just a guard, but the camera's just on Lecter the whole time, and blood is splattering. But the faces he makes, there's sort of an emotion of like shocked by what he's doing, but then also taking some pleasure in it. It's all in the face, and every hit has a different sort of facial expression that's very, very minute. And it's creepy.
Then the shot after is one of the most like disturbingly beautiful, when he kind of stands and just kind of waves his arms slowly.
Hand over, the elegance to it.
Right.
That this was almost like to him a dance, you know.
He appreciates and aspires to the process of elegance and beauty. And the scene you're describing, there's nothing elegant or beautiful about it. And it's where like those emotions are coming through, but then afterward, like the sereneness he feels.
You want to think of a psychopath as being other, they're not like us.
Yeah.
They're nothing we would ever want to aspire to. You wouldn't want to be like a serial killer.
Which is where Buffalo Bill is like,
right. That's kind of, and Hannibal Lecter is almost in this camp where it's like, well, I mean, he's cultured up. I mean, he's very cultured. He's very intelligent. These are the kind of characteristics that we all aspire to.
Yeah.
We all want to be educated. We all want to know the finer things,
and be kind of the smartest person in the room.
Yeah. And also just, we want to be someone who always seems like we're in control, and that we're always calm under pressure. There's nothing maniacal about him. Like you said, he's just very calm. You know? There's no mania in it.
Yeah. It's just, it is unlike any other scary performance. Really, but it sort of set a template. Like I think you've seen that.
Is that
since?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. When did 7 come out?
7 came out in 1995, and I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, because to me, there's a lot of similarities between Kevin Spacey,
right,
and what Anthony Hopkins is doing here.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know that we have a whole lot more to say about Hannibal Lecter, but I just, it was really great to watch this after seeing The Father that he just won for, and just really appreciating everything about Anthony Hopkins. Like he's just such an amazing actor,
And that's interesting because I haven't seen The Father.
Really underseen, amazing movie.
I have it at home from the library.
It is so good.
Maybe going to watch it last night, but it's interesting that he is so quiet in this role because he is kind of a big actor in other stuff. Like he's not afraid to yell and go big with his emotions. And like I think of King Lear and some of the other like Shakespeare performances he's given. He goes very big. He goes for it. Like he's not just one of those sort of quiet actors. So that makes it all the more of an amazing performance to know that this is not the only thing he does. he can be an incredibly warm person. He can be
Yeah,
incredibly caring, and he's just so complex. It was interesting to read. This was the movie. He took it saying, if this one doesn't work out, I'm just going to stick to theater. Because he hadn't really found a way in through TV and movies until this one. And then it was like, well, that's it.
I'm just going to, toss off one of the most iconic performances ever in movie history.
This one doesn't work.
That's not even a main
That's
role
fine.
in the movie, but,
Right.
I'm just going to kind of
own this
steal the
movie.
show. Yeah.
So speaking of Seven, would you consider Seven to be a horror movie?
When pushed, maybe, but I guess I don't typically put it in the same camp as
It's certainly disturbing.
I don't think of it as like my October Spooktacular watch,
No.
I mean, that movie was pretty chilling when I watched it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is horrifying, but is it a horror movie? And I guess what I'm getting at is,
Why is Silence
of the Lambs a horror movie, or is it a crime thriller?
It's all those things. I think that more in the vein of Hitchcock, really.
Yeah.
I mean, how much do you consider Hitchcock horror?
Right.
Or how much do you consider it just sort of suspense, thriller?
Right.
But
I mean, Psycho, I would say, is a horror.
But then you add in, and then I think it's the same with Psycho. I think it's really just the content of what these killers do that make it horrific. And it goes there, I guess. Like the movie goes into the more grotesque body horror type stuff. And Silence of the Lambs is not really that afraid to go there.
But at the same time, it's not what horror in the early 2000s ended up doing, which would have shown us the scenes of him killing and mutilating and everything. And I guess I do consider it a horror, but I'm trying to figure out why this one I would say is pretty undeniably a horror movie, whereas Seven I would not necessarily say is a horror movie, even though it is very disturbing and very chilling. And so I'm just wondering if it's the way that Jonathan Demme made the movie. Is it? I think part of it is the performance of because just genuinely, anytime Hannibal Lecter's on screen, it's scary.
Scary, yeah, yeah, you're right, yeah.
And so the number of scenes that are scary,
yeah.
So we've gone a lot of different directions with this conversation, but given the different avenues we've explored, do we kind of end up at the same spot we were at the beginning? Have you changed your rating at all? Is there anything that's changed your mind at all about the movie or anything?
It doesn't really change my rating.
Yeah.
I feel like it was helpful to take some of these things that were kind of just like cluttered ideas and thoughts in my head and kind of knowing there was these issues that needed to be talked out a little bit more. I just feel like I processed a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you? Do you feel like
I don't think so.
We talk about our ratings. Like, does your rating?
I don't think my rating changes as like a movie, but it's one that I would, it's one of those movies that I don't begrudge its place in cinematic history. I don't dislike the amount that I appreciate and enjoy the movie, but it's just, it's just one of those things that you file away as like, an asterisk, like you said.
It's also like, we don't know how universal we can take this. Like, this is my rating.
Exactly.
I don't think it should be necessarily everybody's rating.
It's one of those things that like, is this a statue that has to come down, or is this a statue that needs a plaque?
Sure.
An additional plaque, right?
Right.
And I guess for me right now, tonight, sitting here, October 2021, I'm saying Spooktacular. I'm saying this is a movie that might need a plaque.
Right. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at as well. Now,
but who knows?
For the Spooktacular.
Yeah, who knows in the future.
But that's the beauty of the Spooktacular.
The Spooktacular, yeah. It's the magic of the season.
Exactly.
Everybody's got the chance to change.
In the season and be scared about it.
Oh, yeah. If we were feeling totally at ease, it wouldn't be the holiday. No. But I think this has been, if nothing else, a highly successful holiday Spooktacular.
Of course, yeah. Is it time to kind of wrap this one up?
We should wrap it up.
Put it in the,
Yeah, put the pumpkin by the curb.
Right.
Take the tinsel and move it to the turkey.
Because we got another holiday coming up.
We do have another holiday.
So we're kind of best buds here, I'm assuming.
I think so, yeah.
We're good.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Why don't we shift gears a little bit and talk about the Hanks.
The Hanks. Third T. Hanks giving. But let's talk about what T. Hanks magic we're going to be witnessing next month. This year, we're going to celebrate a different aspect of the Hanks.
There's so many.
Maybe we have, right?
I mean, where do you start? I mean, obviously,
I guess
you
we
start with
acting,
acting,
right?
You know?
Yeah,
and this is still in there a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. But this is also the feature film debut of his screenwriting and directing.
Oh, he wrote the movie.
He
too?
wrote and directed the movie we're about to tell you about. 1996, 25 years.
25 years.
That Thing You Do. Which Nate has
I've
not
never seen this.
I don't get it.
I don't know how.
Here's
the thing: is I feel a little ashamed to say that I would even be someone who is an
Hanks
avid
fan,
T. Hanks
and you haven't watched.
celebrator.
I would never shame anybody, but you should very much be ashamed.
I have no reason. That's the other thing.
No, I know.
I have no reason to have not seen it. It seems like a movie I would very much enjoy.
I think you will. I think you will.
It seems like a feel-good movie. It's one that people love. You know, like it's not one of those that people think of and think, oh, that's kind of lesser Hanks. You know?
Right. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think
it holds a dear spot in a lot of people's hearts, like most Hanks does. And
of course.
And I just never saw it. And I'm sorry. This is going to be like a penitent watch. You know.
Oh, I want you to enjoy it though.
Okay.
I mean, so Hanks wrote and directed, I'm guessing produced. It was put out by his Playtone production company.
It's a real passion project.
A passion project, yeah. I think it is a story he really wanted to tell and kind of explore. It's a fictional story of a band in the 60s who is kind of experiencing fame or trying to experience fame. So Hanks is in it, but he's not the star. Tom Everett Scott, I would say, is probably the star. Ethan Embry is in it. Steve Zahn is in it. Liv Tyler, Charlize Theron.
No reason I have not seen this movie.
Music, and I will say this, the movie probably would have lived and died by the music, because if you're going to write a movie about a band that it breaks big, you've got to have music that would break big.
And I know the song.
Music written by Adam Schlesinger of Fountains of Wayne. I won't say much more about what I think about Hanks here, but this is an exciting this is an exciting watch.
I am very excited to watch this. I'm excited. This has T. Hanksgiving written all over it, and it's not just because it's got Tom Hanks all over it.
Yeah,
I mean that is why.
There's a whole lot.
That
I mean, it was Hanks who brought it all together,
right? Of course.
So it's got that. And on a sad note, I don't know how big of a Fountains of Wayne fan you are, but you have to be a fan of Adam Schlesinger's music because he's probably written a song that you are familiar with.
I am familiar with the song That Thing You Do.
Of course. But of course, Adam Schlesinger died last year.
Right, of COVID.
COVID complications.
Yeah.
So this is in a way a sad kind of
memoriam.
Yeah, a way to think about Adam Schlesinger, get him in there.
Yeah.
But I really hope you enjoy this experience. I have not seen this since I was a kid, but not going too much into what we're going. Well, let's just record the episode now. This was a movie I watched a ton when I was a kid.
Do we need to do like a live taping of me watching this and just play by play?
I've thought about that. I've thought about how boring that would be for people to listen to, but how fun it might be for us to do. But yeah, it's a big part of my childhood. Now, I don't want to speak ill of the Hanks, but of the two movies he's directed, this is the one I would like to watch. I haven't seen Larry Crown.
Easy now.
I haven't seen Larry Crown. That's all I'll say about that.
This is the Hanks we're talking about.
That's all I'll say about that. But it's still the Holiday Spooktacular. You can do it. Yeah, I can still be honest.
You can speak ill of Larry Crown now. Do not.
I mean, I can't even speak ill of it because I haven't seen it. Right. So I don't know. All right, this is the only other negative thing I'll say about Tom Hanks.
Why?
He was an executive producer on Mamma Mia.
I still haven't seen Mamma Mia either. How much of a T. Hanks celebrator?
If you want to continue celebrating T. Hanks,
I have to see Mamma Mia?
Do not see Mamma Mia.
Okay, all right. That's the appropriate way to celebrate.
By ignoring that. All right, so That Thing You Do is that thing that we're going to watch next time.
But hey, it is T. Hanksgiving, so there's plenty more Hanks to go around.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that in addition to That Thing You Do, we would love to hear from any of our listeners about any other Tom Hanks that you are digging right now, and I mean digging into right now.
Yeah.
Tom Hanks stories, anecdotes, ways that he has touched your life. We want to hear it all. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Let's run through those. Why don't
We've got the much maligned and we'll see about its future, Facebook.com.
We told Mark all of this.
He is playing the fool, and boy, does he wear it well.
This is why we just stuck to our website. By the way, canwestillbefriends.net.
Right? You can all dig through the archives there.
Yeah.
We've got a page of all the movies,
We
and
have a
post
comments section
there, right.
where you can comment, but that's as far as we go.
Yeah,
We don't get into
we don't gather your
election meddling.
information. We don't let people repost stuff. And we showed them our website. We said you don't have to do what you're doing.
This is the
you
way
can
to
do
it.
this on a website. You can just keep it like this.
Yeah, you don't have to give into all the terrible things that you do to humanity.
Right. So
But we're there.
Yeah,
We're
we're
on
on Facebook.com.
Facebook.
That's more of a favorite of Mark than anything. And you can find us at Can We Still Be Friends podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We're also on Instagram. It's another Facebook website. Can We Still Be Friends pod? Hopefully there won't be a long stretch where you can't access us on those two sites again. That's another thing that we talked to them about.
right.
The backbone
We said
servers
here,
are just looking vulnerable. And
Here, this is canwestillbefriends.net. This
Right.
is the way to do it.
Look at this website.
It doesn't really ever go down.
WordPress does all this stuff for you, Mark. You don't have to write all your code. And so anyway, we're on Instagram as well. You can message us there. You can find our episode links, and you can find pictures.
Mm-hmm.
There might be one of our holiday spooktacular decorations.
Well, yes.
It's scary. It's festive. It is
Everything
it is
you
full of
want from
holiday
the
joy.
Spooktacular. Yeah.
And we've got our email address, feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. You can use that email to send us a voice recording if you're not a type. But you can also leave us a voice message at our phone number.
847-306-9532. Leave that message. We'd love to hear it, and we will definitely put it in. And I want to say real quick, we had a really nice message from a listener, Tim, which I don't think we're going to put in the episode, just because
it was very personal.
Very personal, yeah.
It was very nice. A longtime friend of mine and Nate's, and so a shout out to Tim.
Shout out to Tim. I think we just want to say
message.
we heard you, and it touched us. It was really nice to hear. So thank you. And
But
thank
for
you
the
listening.
same reason you don't read a heartfelt birthday card out to the party,
Right.
we're not gonna
We'll put that.
point that. But that one's for us. That one's gonna live on our mantle.
Exactly. Yeah, a good way to put it. I don't know how we're gonna nail it up there on that mantle, but we'll get it there.
Yeah, maybe we'll put it in an NFT. Then put the
frame around
USB around the frame around the USB with the
hanging
NFT.
on the mantle with the. I don't know if we'll do a tack or a nail, but we'll get it there.
3M strips. It'll be up
that way we can take it down.
Take it down and sleep with it.
Yeah. We hope that you are have a wonderful spooktacular.
Yeah, enjoy that the time with your family, freaking each other out.
The candy.
Be spooked. Be spooky.
Spook others.
Right.
'Tis the season.
We
can't say it enough.
We can't say it enough. We won't say it enough.
We won't. And so, so to have a wonderful spooktacular. We are very much looking forward to our 3rd annual Tea Hanksgiving. We do hope that you will join us. We want to just say thank you for listening. And,
Watch that thing you do.
Watch that thing you do, and we'll catch you next month.